Trump unravels in fiery Oval Office interview as pressures mount across his administration. In American politics, it often takes just a few pointed follow-up questions to expose the cracks beneath the surface. That dynamic was on full display this morning during an Oval Office interview between former President Donald Trump and Politico reporter Dasha Burns. What began as a routine exchange quickly spiraled into a chaotic series of contradictions, personal attacks, and inadvertent admissions about the internal dysfunction and alleged illegality within his administration. The episode highlights something that has long mystified Trump critics: how rarely reporters press him with even basic follow-up questions, and how quickly he unravels when they do. Burns asked little more than clarifications, yet Trump's responses veered into defensive rambling, racially charged rhetoric, confusion about policy details, and attempts to shift blame onto subordinates. Before the confrontation reached its most intense moments, particularly when Trump reacted aggressively to questions about Venezuela and inadvertently acknowledged the criminal implications of actions carried out under his command, it began with a now-familiar line of attack: Trump's repeated and inflammatory statements about Minnesota. Renewed racist attacks toward Minnesota. Trump returned to rhetoric that he has used many times before, focusing on Minnesota's Somali community. Speaking in sweeping, derogatory terms, he described Somali immigrants as contributors to a supposed decline in the state. He specifically targeted a Somali-American congresswoman, accusing her of marrying her brother to obtain immigration benefits and portraying her as someone who does nothing but complain. He insisted that her country of origin was one of the worst in the world and said she should go back to fix it. Trump added that he had long complained about Somalia and that Democrats, including Minnesota's governor, were running some bad ships. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz responded forcefully, rejecting Trump's statements as racist, bizarre, un-American, and fundamentally unpatriotic. Walz emphasized that the United States is a nation built on immigration, where people from diverse backgrounds pursue opportunity and contribute to the nation's prosperity. This exchange underscored a recurring tension in Trump's public persona: his attempt to define patriotism as symbolic pageantry, flag-hugging, military parades, and combative speeches, while often ignoring or undermining the values that underpin the country's identity. As critics noted, Trump's rhetoric frequently targets immigrants, service members, and democratic institutions in ways that contradict the inclusive and constitutional principles he claims to champion. Tariffs, taxes, and confusion on economic policy. From there, the interview moved into economic policy, where Trump's explanations became increasingly tangled. Burns questioned him about potential carve-outs on consumer goods, such as coffee and bananas, which are affected by his tariff plans. Trump confirmed that he had already implemented small exceptions but quickly pivoted to boast about economic inflows he attributed entirely to tariffs. He claimed that tariffs had brought $18 trillion into the country, an assertion presented without explanation, and contrasted that with what he described as less than $1 trillion during the Biden administration. He insisted tariffs were responsible for reversing declines in American manufacturing and bringing automobile companies back to the United States. Trump then recounted a puzzling anecdote involving Intel, saying the government had secured 10% of the company in exchange for regulatory action, resulting in $40 billion in profits in about 10 minutes. He complained that no one gave him credit for this. Despite the confusion surrounding his figures, Trump did make one point unmistakably clear: he intends to increase tariffs in some areas. By definition, this means raising taxes on American consumers. Yet he repeatedly denied that tariffs are taxes, even as he announced a farmer bailout explicitly financed with tariff revenue, effectively taxpayer money. His allies on conservative networks, he predicted, would frame these actions as strong populist leadership. But the underlying reality remained: Trump's tariff policy shifts costs directly onto Americans in the form of higher prices. Escalation over Venezuela questions. The most explosive moment of the interview occurred when Burns pressed Trump on his stance toward Venezuela. When asked whether he could rule out an American ground invasion, Trump refused to answer and immediately lashed out at Politico, calling it an extremely unfriendly publication. He alleged, without evidence, that the Obama administration had given Politico $8 million to keep it afloat, referring to standard government expenditures for media subscriptions. Burns responded that she was asking on behalf of the American public seeking transparency. Trump, however, dismissed the question, claiming to be the most transparent politician maybe in the world, before insisting he would not discuss military strategy with her. The exchange then shifted to a recent military incident. When asked whether a second strike had been necessary, Trump distanced himself from the decision. "I don't get involved in that. That's up to them." He insinuated that Pete Hegseth, long aligned with Trump, was responsible even though the two are closely connected in decision-making. This attempt to offload responsibility contradicted Trump's usual posture. He often boasts that he alone makes decisions, that courts do not restrict him, and that he directs federal officials personally. But whenever a situation becomes politically risky, he abruptly claims detachment. In this case, the implications were severe. Trump's comments suggested a separation between himself and actions carried out under his administration's command. Actions critics have described as criminal. The attempt to retreat into ambiguity only underlined the gravity of the allegations. Weakening legal front, unqualified prosecutors, and judicial rejections. Beyond the interview, Trump faced simultaneous political setbacks. According to reporting contextualized during the segment, several U.S. attorneys appointed by Trump were deemed wildly unqualified and were unable to secure Senate confirmation. Despite this, Trump attempted to keep them in office beyond legal limits. Multiple courts ruled against him, stating that these prosecutors were not serving legally. One of the most notable resignations came from Alina Habba, the U.S. attorney in New Jersey, who was forced to step down after legal challenges. Others in similar positions are expected to follow. These improperly installed attorneys had taken actions aligned with Trump's political interests, including filing federal charges against individuals he considered enemies. One example involved New York Attorney General Letitia James, whom Trump had demanded be indicted for mortgage fraud. The indictment was thrown out, and when the Justice Department attempted to revive the charges, a grand jury refused to indict. In a twist of irony, documents later revealed that Trump's own mortgage paperwork from Florida was filled out in the exact same manner as the paperwork for which he sought to have James prosecuted. A president at his weakest point. In the broader context, Trump's critics argue that he is experiencing one of the weakest and most unpopular periods of his public life. The pushback against him is coming from virtually every direction. Courts, Congress, state officials, and even unexpected groups, such as religious communities staging peaceful protests outside detention facilities. The pattern is unmistakable. Despite his efforts to project strength, announcing a nationwide economic tour, touting his tariff policies, and escalating rhetoric on national security, Trump is confronted with legal defeats, political isolation, administrative blunders, and grassroots opposition. It amounts to a drumbeat of losses, or as one observer summarized, L after L after L.